Welcome to our workshop. That's a workshop that is dealing with the topic of elderly abuse and elderly violence, specifically from the perspective of perpetrators' accountability and perpetrator work. My name is Sandra Jovanovic-Belotic. I'm a psychologist, training and capacity building manager at European Network, WWP. I will be co-facilitating this workshop together with my colleague Alessandra. Alessandra, will you please say hi and introduce yourself?
Hello to everybody. Welcome. We're really happy to have you here today. My name is Alessandra Pauncz. I'm joining you from Florence, Italy. I'm the executive director of the European Network of the Work with Perpetrators. Also a psychologist. I have started in one perpetrator program in Florence, yes, and we're really, Sandra and I are really very excited about the opportunity today of sharing with you some reflections on this topic.
Thanks, Alessandra. And from our team, we also have Dure, who is our communication team member and who will be helping us with technical issues. So hi Dure, would you like also to introduce yourself and say hi?
Hello everyone, it's lovely to see you all. I'm Dure and I'm the project communications officer here at WWP.
Thanks, Dure, and thanks to everyone for introducing yourself. I can see that we have participants from Mexico, from Jordan, from Cameroon, from Sweden, France, from the UK. That is really, really excited. When we designed the workshop, we actually designed it in a way to guide you through the topic, but also to make sure that you have opportunity to exchange in small groups, because as I mentioned, we do want to take advantage that so many professionals from all over the globe is here and gathered for this topic. So let me share my screen and start with the presentation. Yeah, I hope that you can see it. So as you know, we will be focusing on protecting elderly women from domestic violence while holding elderly men to account. This is one of really interesting and let's say underexplored topic. And we are really looking forward to tackle a bit of the topic and to share some recommendations that we have, and also to hear from you and to learn from your experiences. We received, as I mentioned, many applications across the globe, and we carefully read all of your expectations and suggestions and the needs that you described in the registration form. But we would also like to start the workshop with hearing a bit more about your expectations from the workshop. And we would like to do it in this way. We invite you to use Slido. You can do it by entering slido.com on your PC or on your phone, or just scan this QR code that you see in your left corner of your screen and enter this number. So it's 296411. And you will be able to see the name of our workshop and also to see the question about the expectations from the workshop. When you type them on your phone or when you type them on your screen, we will be able to see it here anonymously. And please try to somehow frame your expectations in 1 or 2 words, because that works the best with Slido. So I hope that you can access, so to improve safety, to support elderly, what data is useful. This is really interesting because data is not really available, and I guess that's the reason why you asked this question. Accessible support, We see here how it interacts with some health issues like dementia, to spread your knowledge in the topic. Perfect. Yeah, so as you see, if when more and more answers arrive, we get more and more on them on the screen, and if some of them repeat, we actually see them in larger size. Yeah, so what are risks that are posed from the side of the perpetrator? What are needs? Probably what can we do about it as perpetrator programs? Gender equality or inequality and how that intersects with age. That's also really interesting. You will see that we have gender lens in this workshop, and it will explore the topic with the gender lens. How to hold other perpetrators to account, how to adapt our interventions, what are typologies of perpetrators. Yeah, perfect. What are specific challenges? So from what you are writing, it seems that we will cover the most of your expectations. I'm afraid that we will not have definite answers to many of these, but I'm sure that we will bring some new ideas and the framework how to think about this. So I will move on and actually go to the goal of our workshop. So when we were thinking about the workshop, we actually set it this goal to strengthen the responses for protecting the elderly survivors through efficient and adjusted work with perpetrators. As this is really underdeveloped field, and there's so many things that need to be done in the field, especially when we talk about perpetrators. We organized the workshop so that it's divided in 3 main parts. So first we will talk a bit, obviously, about why this topic is important and what's the relevance of the topic. And then we will focus to perpetrators of elderly abuse as a really diverse category, and we will talk about that in a bit. And after that, we will narrow it down to elderly perpetrators of intimate partner violence. And we will focus on what are specifics in working with elderly perpetrators who commit intimate partner violence, and especially how can we adapt perpetrator programs to fit their needs. So this is the general structure of the workshop. This workshop and actually the opportunity of WWP to work on this topic is something that is supported by MARVOW project, multi-agency response to violence against older women. And this is a project that is conducted by 6 partner organizations in 4 countries, in Greece, Austria, Germany, and Estonia. And I know that we have some partners here, and a special hello to all of you. The project has several goals, and it's obviously addressing the topic of how to protect elderly women who are survivors. But what's particularly interesting is that within the project, we developed multi-agency cooperation model for protection of elderly survivors and work with their perpetrators. This model has been tested in 6 cities in 3 countries. And we have some experiences from this process, some guidelines for the work, and some recommendations for all the organizations that would like to replicate and move forward from the experiences that we have. And actually the project is close to its end. So we have some interesting outputs to share with all of you. And I would like to use this opportunity to invite you to learn more about MARVOW project. Dura will share the project webpage in the chat, and to invite you also to our final conference of the project that's going to take place on 1st of March. It will also be online, and you are all really welcome, and we would be happy to see you as well on the final conference. Dore will also put the registration link there. So this was a bit of the introduction and the framework of this work, and I wouldn't waste more time, and I would dive straight into our topic, and I would start with this video. Just let me know if you can see it and hear it. Can you hear the sound?
Yes, thank you, Sandra.
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you.
बेटा, इस बार भी
So this is one really interesting video from our perspective, and guides us really nicely into the topic of elderly and problems and specific challenges that elderly are facing with. And some of these challenges are more visible, some are less visible. This video is a part of the campaign conducted in India with the goal to actually tackle social isolation and loneliness of elderly. And this is one of the specific challenges that is more or less visible. But one of the challenges that they also face with is domestic violence and domestic abuse. And this is not so visible. And this is something that we will focus during this workshop and actually talk about it. Why we are talking about it. In the first place, we know, and I believe that we all share same values, that everyone needs to be free from violence and to live lives free of violence. But also when we look at how our world is changing and how we are all getting older, not only on the individual level, but also collectively. Our countries are getting older, our continents are getting older. So the challenges and problems that elderly people face with are becoming even more and more relevant. And you can see here the projections from the Eurostat that show how the population of elderly people will increase in the next years. And how the population of younger people will decrease in the following years. So it is becoming more and more important that we take the perspective of elderly into account, and also when we talk about domestic violence. One of the things that we found really interesting is there a domestic violence in this category? And I remember really lively when Alessandra and I presented in one international conference this topic, and one of professionals who was also one of the presenters said, "This is really strange for me. We don't have violence against elderly." He was from Madagascar, I believe. He said, "We respect our elderly. We don't have violence toward elderly." And I think that this really nicely shows how the problem of violence against elderly is not visible, and how We don't recognize it, we don't map it, we don't adjust our interventions. And this is also, when you try to find data about the phenomenon, it will not be an easy task. And I think that Dr. Hannah Bowl, a professor from the UK, described it in a good way. She said, this is a quote from one of her research: older women as victims of men's violence have historically been ignored. Older age has for a long time been assumed to be a protective factor against violence and abuse, even though the evidence to support such assumptions has been lacking. At a national level, we have excluded women aged 60 and over from our analysis of domestic violence, and consequently, we are ill-equipped to recognize and prevent violence against older women. We remain shocked when an older woman is killed by a man, believing this to be an unusual occurrence, when in fact, my research has identified at least 1 in 4 domestic homicides involves a woman aged 60 or older, despite them constituting only 80% of the population. And at least half of these deaths are committed by an adult son or grandson. In few research that you can actually find data that backs this up. This is the data from one research in Italy that conducted analysis of femicide victims in 1 decade. And we can see that this number is not low at all. So violence definitely exists and it can be really severe, but there are some specifics. This is one of them. So while younger women are more likely to be killed by a partner or ex-partner, half of elderly female victims were killed by other family members, sons, grandsons, and relatives. So when we think about interventions, we need to take this into account and to be aware that population of perpetrators against elderly women is really diverse. There are also more specifics. So for example, it's much less likely that they will try to leave their partners and to ask for help if they are over 60 than under. It's also more likely that they will have some kind of disability. And we know that this is really important because it's one of the risk factors for severe violence. So this is a phenomenon that needs specific attention, and there are some complicating issues how to ensure safety of elderly survivors. And one of the things that we learned is that interventions that are in place for other age categories will not be suitable for this target group and for elderly survivors, and we need to rethink that. And there are different kinds of challenges. So we are all aware about health and how that intersects with violence and with also ability to ask for support. How they are usually isolated, they don't have support, social network and social support. Finances are often a problem, and this health and finances often leads to them being dependent of some people, many people, sometimes even their perpetrators or vice versa. We know that there are multiple potential perpetrators and relations with them. And it is absolutely unquestionable that if we want to ensure their safety, we need to work all together, and much more institutions need to be on board for this multi-agency response if we want to have good interventions. We are also aware that professionals lack capacity in this field. And when we talk about perpetrators and their accountability, some of the learnings from these projects really confirm that existing measures in keeping perpetrators accountable are not really efficient and are really hard to apply when it comes to elderly perpetrators. Just as one example, if a perpetrator is actually someone who takes care of the victim, if you remove him from the house, she remains without support, for example, and we will talk about that a bit more. When we have multi-agency work, there is a lack of focus on accountability of perpetrators. So in meetings that we had, there was no specific attention on who these perpetrators are, from which category, what happened with them, was that efficient? Did they get any kind of invitation to change and to stop their behavior? And we also know that perpetrator programs lack skills how to deal with this category. And you can read more about this in our report that Dure will share in the chat. We did a mapping within perpetrator programs and actually discovered that these kind of services are severely underdeveloped. So this is a bit of why this topic is relevant and what are specifics, but we want to focus on perpetrators and their accountability. And Alessandra will guide you through that part. I would use the opportunity to invite you, if you have any questions, to put them in the chat.
I saw in the chat that there's a question I think maybe we should address. And the issue was, who do you consider as an elderly population? Some people were uncomfortable because the statistics were 60 and over, and they thought that 60 sort of is a very young age to consider elderly. So I think that then Sandra, you can integrate it. I think that generally the age range, just because there is a lack of research, hasn't clearly been defined. So there are sort of different researches that look at different age categories. The reason for which they were grouped in 60 and over is that the research was looking at that age range, and it was 60 and over, so it wasn't possible to pinpoint it at 65 or 7 or 75. But I don't know if there's something else that you would like to integrate, Sandra.
Yeah, I mean, actually, when you look at the research, that's what you mentioned, Alessandra, they put different kind of categories there, and some have specific age groups, like for 60 to 65, for 65 to 70, and some just have 60 plus or 65 plus. Alicia?
Yes, I just wanted to add something from the perspective of the project, because this project also works on already outcomes of 2 other previous projects. Sorry for my cat. Projects Huseva and Tisova, where we also worked specifically on violence against older women. We usually say older women, and within these projects, it's also like the definition of an older woman was also taken care of. And of course, there is not specifically a line where a person suddenly becomes an older person or an elderly. And we usually use like this older person. And within the research, there are just different time it's used. For us, within the MARVOW project, we accepted the age of 60. And as someone also mentioned within the chart, this 60-65 in Europe is the age when usually people go into pension or stop being active and professional-wise, and therefore it's an age which usually consists with getting into this period of being older, not anymore professionally active. And also I wanted to add from the perspective, like basically of all the countries, these statistics that you showed about femicides, they are really, the prevalence of femicides against older women is really very big. It's around 30%. So it's the same prevalence in all the age groups.
Thank you, Alicia. That was a very helpful integration. So yeah, continue bringing on the questions if you have them. And we are now going to continue with the presentation, but very soon we are going to be, let me just hopefully, we are soon going to be also dividing into groups and having a little bit more of interactive groups. So If you're a bit tired of all the slides, we're almost ready to take a break on that. So what do we mean when we say that it is important to focus on perpetrators' accountability? What do we mean by accountability? Accountability is a really important point of perpetrator work, and it applies to different levels. It has to do with perpetrators themselves that attend the programs, that take personal responsibility, but also the responsibility of the perpetrator programs. And there are various levels of this accountability. There's an aspect that has to do with the people that are involved. So it's at a personal level, monitoring, challenging harmful personal attitudes, beliefs, and behavior. There are aspects related to relational accountability that have to do with power and privilege and how they play out within relationships between men and women. And then we have a level of social accountability. So how do we respond to the justice system, to the social system, to the healthcare system, and how the different levels of accountability interact? And that is a really interesting question if we look at it. So what do we have here? Here we have the various stakeholders, both that need to be accountable and the stakeholders to which we need to be accountable, because it's a very interesting concept. Accountability is different from responsibility. If I say I am responsible for something, that means that it's an action or something that has to do with my own behavior. When I talk about accountability, it's relational. I have to be accountable to somebody for this to make sense. So for example, we believe that accountability applies to perpetrator in terms that they have to be accountable to the women and children that they have harmed. There wouldn't be a direct perpetrator's accountability to women's support services, while instead perpetrator programs are both accountable to the women and children that have been harmed, but they are also accountable to the women's support services. Perpetrators would need to be accountable to the justice system. Perpetrator programs would need to be accountable to the justice system, as to all the agencies that are working on the topic. And specifically in perpetrator programs need to take responsibility of their female co-workers. And if we look instead at the individual level of the service providers of perpetrator programs, if they are male, there also needs to be a responsibility towards their female co-workers. So there are various levels at which all the actors need to be accountable to different degrees, to different subjects. Also, it works in the other direction. So, for example, the justice system needs to be accountable to the women and children. So that is an interesting way also of looking at not only we as perpetrator programs or whoever's working with perpetrator needs to be accountable to the justice system, but the justice system itself needs to be accountable to women and children that are harmed by the violence. So this is just to say that sort of when we talk about perpetrators' accountability and perpetrator programs' accountability, we have a complex level of different agents that are interacting and that it's important to take into account. Now, to add a layer of complexity to the issues, to the specific issue that we are looking on today, which is who the perpetrators are and perpetrators of older women's abuse, we also have different subjects that can be perpetrators. So we could have sons and daughters that are perpetrating violence against older women. We could have a spouse that is perpetrating violence against an older woman. We could have a family caretaker that is being violent towards an older woman, or we could have an external caretaker that is taking taking care and being violent at the same time with an older person. Let's briefly look at some literature that has sort of been developed on this topic in terms of typologies of perpetrators of elderly abuse. These typologies were developed in an article in 2000. And the author talks about the overwhelmed offender, who's somebody that provides day-to-day care to an older person, but is incapable of meeting their needs. The overwhelmed offender is somebody that realizes that their behavior is abusive, but it's really difficult for him or her to seek help. There's a question, obviously, of shame. And there is also the difficulty of admitting it to others, because they realize that the behavior is problematic. The impaired offender, this is an individual that has physical or mental problems or suffers from substance abuse, which makes it difficult to probably carry out caregiving duties. It might be the case of children that have grown up in households with mental problems or substance abuse problems, and obviously when the parents get older are unable or incapable of taking care of them, or other kind of situations. It could be linked to a couple and one of the partners becoming severely depressed, or having been sort of an occasional substance user or regular substance user, and then what happens when the other partner actually needs caring for and has different health requirements. The narcissistic offender is an individual that does not want to care for an older person, and does this only to exploit them. So here there's a much more malevolent. There's sort of different levels of actual harm that's being in some ways deliberately caused. There's a bullying offender, and this is somebody in which sort of the element of having power and control and exercising control over the victim is very strong, and there's little compassion for the older person. This could also be a perpetrator of domestic violence. It's been violence his whole life, and it continues to be violence even as he ages, or it becomes even more aggressive and violent. And then there is a sadistic offender, who is actually somebody that derives pleasure from humiliating and terrifying an older person and inflicting them suffering. So this is sort of an example of classification that was made. If we then sort of apply the first category that we looked at to this, so if we look at sort of the different possible people that could be the perpetrators, and we combine it with these different categories, we see how much sort of work in terms of responding to different needs and different stories and different ways of perpetrators, of different kinds of perpetrators, because obviously if it is the son or daughter or a family caretaker or the caretaker or the spouse, and we are talking about overwhelmed offenders, the kind of interventions, the support system, what alternatives are in place, or depending on the different categories, obviously change drastically. So as with the issue around accountability, where we have different layers and different interplays, here also we have different layers and different interplays, and the necessity to really look at intervention in a much more specialized way, and also understanding the various issues, and also understanding what is possible to do in a perpetrator programs and where we need actual specific programs to respond, or we need to sort of integrate programs. I think at this point it's back to you, Sandra.
Yes, thanks. I think this is really good way to kind of summarize this aspect and remind ourselves that when we talk about perpetrators of elderly abuse, we actually talk about really diverse categories. And also if we look at these typologies and how our interventions need to be adjusted, it's definitely a challenge. And as it was brought up in the discussion and on Padlet, we are aware that we actually don't have these kind of interventions developed. Someone mentioned we don't have specialized programs for children to parent violence in these cases, or we don't have programs that support caretakers, or we have them just in some areas, some countries. But we do have programs or mostly have programs for intimate partner violence and for men. And now we will focus on this category when the perpetrator is an elderly person who commits intimate partner violence toward his spouse. And we will look at that in the continuation of the workshop. So let me share my screen. Just 1 second. So I want to start with the video, short one and interesting one. Please just give me thumbs up if everything is fine and if you can hear it.
30 000, 140, 150, 150 000 poprvé, 150 000 po druhé, 150 000 po třetí. Prodáno pánovi s číslem 33. Další položkou aukce je Jiří Navrátil. Panu Navrátilovi je 82 let, zažil několik režimů, vystudoval vysokou školu, byl špičkou ve svém oboru. S manželkou vychovali 3 děti. Takže pan Navrátil poprvé. Pan Navrátil po druhé. Pan Navrátil po třetí. Položka nebyla prodána.
Protože je pro nás důležitější to, co jde koupit, než co lze získat, přehlížíme podstatné věci. Stáří nám může dát víc, než si myslíme.
So, this video leads us into the topic. And definitely we can question our values and how elderly are treated in the society. But I would invite us to all think about this from the perspective of power and losing power, and how this intersects with aging, and how this intersects with violence. So if we look at aging and the process itself, it's kind of a natural losing of power process, right? So we lose our physical strength, our health, some other things, but because also of the ways that elderly are placed in most of the communities, we also lose our social influence, finances. So it's a process of losing power. And let's also think about, is this process the same or different for men and women? Is there gender component in how we perceive this loss of power? And if we also think about men who perpetrate violence and act violently toward their spouses, and when they are in the position to lose power like this, that comes naturally with aging, what happens then? I also lively remember some of the perpetrators that I worked with, who were reported for the first time by their family members when they were in their 70s. Because actually they started to commit the most severe violence at that age. And when you talk with them, you actually experience this loss of power, that everyone are making decisions, they don't ask him, and he needs to use more severe strategies in that power and control wheel to actually maintain control. So I would invite us that when we discuss this issue in the rest of the workshop, that we keep these things in mind, and that we look at the process of aging as also process of losing power, and that we look it from the gender lens, and that we look how men perceive this, especially men who use violence. And in order to continue the conversation, we have some insights from real participants in perpetrator programs, older ones, and Alessandra will guide us through that. Would you like me to go and just play it, or?
No, I think
prefer to
just the sharing, yeah, as I just want to introduce it briefly. So I'm going to share just two very small parts of the work done with an elderly perpetrator, an older man perpetrator, in one of the programs. The context is that of it was a small group. There were 4 men, and it was an outsider witness structure, for those of you that are sort of familiar with that. They had seen a video of a victim talking about the violence that she had experienced. It was mostly psychological violence that she was talking about. And this workshop was for the men to really reflect on their controlling and abusive behavior. So once they listened to the interview, they were asked to sort of reflect on different aspects and how it related to their life and how experience that had made an impact on them. So I will start with the first video.
Aver visto questa cosa mi dà proprio lo stimolo per dire: io di questa cosa e bisogna che ne parli, io di questa cosa bisogna che ne parli, perché anche quello che ha detto di recuperare gli spazi, no? Lui parlava per sé, io in questo caso devo dire la necessità di recuperare i suoi spazi, anche se io soffro perché lei arriva tardi, perché sono in pena che la mettano sotto in bicicletta, ma lei ha necessità di fare quello che sta facendo. Però la contrattazione con promessi piuttosto che parlarci è sempre molto difficile.
So here we hear it's sort of the reflection on realizing how intruding he has always been on not allowing spaces to his wife and partner, and the kind of effect that it might have on her.
Aver visto questa cosa mi dà proprio lo stimolo per dire: io di questa cosa e bisogna che ne parli, io di questa cosa bisogna che ne parli, perché anche quello che ha detto.
Sorry, that was
Aver visto questa cosa mi dà proprio fare un appunto su questo senso di controllo di cui si parlava, perché io ho molto esercitato controllo e pressione su mia moglie. Questo ed era latente negli anni passati. Adesso questo senso di controllo e di oppressione su quello che fa o i suoi ritardi è tutto concentrato su una mia preoccupazione e su una mia paura che le possa succedere qualcosa. Ma per me mi ha revocato tante mancanze che ho fatto nei confronti di mia moglie. Cioè, io rivedo nell'atteggiamento di quell'uomo molti aspetti che anche io ho fatto. Questo senso di possessione, di volerla sempre vicino a me, che lei non mi debba lasciare, che lei non esca fuori nemmeno per andare a comprarsi un giornale perché io la voglio vicino a me. Questo c'è stato e in sostanza c'è anche ora, perché voglio dire, non ovviamente nella forma violenta come narrato qui, però ecco, io la vorrei sempre accanto.
So again, in the two videos, they were supposed to be in a different order. It's again a reflection on psychological forms of control and sort of learning how to see them and understanding them and thinking about the consequences and thinking about sort of having to discuss this and get his wife's input on this. Okay, so I think Sandra, it's back to you. Sorry.
Thanks. So this was really short insight in reflections of one elderly perpetrator. I know that there's many of you who actually worked with perpetrators, and I'm sure that you can recall the experiences of working with some of them that are older. And we would like to discuss about this and to invite you to remember your experience in working with this category of perpetrators and to think how did this experience look like. I will also summarize with the stages of psychosocial development. I'm sure that many of you did hear about Erickson's stages of psychosocial development. And you can read more about it, but actually he's saying that there are certain stages of our development, that each of them has specific tasks that we need to fulfill. And if we go through it in a right way, then we can enter to deal with our next developmental tasks. And this stage of maturity is actually shown with a mirror, and that's something that's really interesting. And what he's saying is that actually this is a stage where you naturally look yourself in a mirror and look back in your life. And that this is something that can be filled with a sense of integrity or despair. There are some gaps in this theory, definitely. One of them is that there's no gender. And we know that when we look at this cycle, there's also a gender component and that we age in a different way. There are also other tests that we have. So we need to accept that we are changing, that our body is changing, that we are aging, that we are depending on others, that we are losing power, that we need to give power to face termination of life and all these kind of things. So it's not really easy. And it's a natural phase when we look back and look at our life and try to figure out, was it a good life? Did we live it upon our values or not? And what he says, that people who believe they've had a positive impact on the world through their contributions will live this phase with a sense of integrity, while those that have different kind of experience, that they didn't live it up to their standards or other standards, develop sense of despair. And this is really interesting to see how we actually fit it with perpetrator programs, because we do want to nurture integrity in this phase. And we need to be aware that when they look back in their life and we actually encourage them to see all the consequences and everything that wasn't done in a good way, that actually might provoke despair. And we need to find paths to also then bring back balance to integrity, and to use this specific developmental phase when it's natural to look yourself in a mirror and to look back in your life, and to use it as a motivator and be really, really skilled to balance this despair and integrity, hopefully eventually coming to integrity itself. So this is the really short summary and takeaway idea from today's workshop. And we came to the end of the workshop, and I have a feeling that we would need at least 2 days to share all insights and experiences. And I'm really grateful that we had an opportunity to have at least these 2 hours and to reflect on this together. So find your purpose, and this is one of the tests that we will have I would close the workshop with at this point and just invite you to fill in the evaluation form because we are a bit behind our schedule. Dure, could you please, yeah, so this evaluation is really, really important for us because we actually do read it and try to improve our practice based on that. So we would be really grateful if you could fill in the evaluation form. And I would like to thank you for your participation and your contributions. And yeah, hopefully you have some good takeaways.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. It was really great being together with all of you. And thanks again for coming, and please the evaluation.